So I suggest we start. I feel like people are still rolling in, but they can join us when they can. And obviously, as always, these sessions are recorded and people can go back and listen to them again and again whenever needed. So I will start sharing my screen so that we can kick off today's session. There we are. Okay. I hope you can all see the screen. So as promised and as advertised, today's session's name is Low Effort, High Impact, and we will be discussing microlearning in health professions education with Lecturio. And as always, we will give you a theoretical background of the concept, in this case, a teaching concept we are going to dive deeper into. And we will discuss how you can use Lecturio in any other digital platforms in existence to leverage this for your students or for your learners or even for your faculty. So there will be some questions popping up. There's some open-ended questions that I will be asking, and you all can pop in the chat and answer them as we go. There was also going to be multiple choice questions, and as always, I'm trying to make these sessions as best as possible for us to interact, so as interactive as we can. Okay, so I'm today's speaker. My name is Goran Stevanovski. I'm a medical doctor from Skopje, from the Republic of North Macedonia, where I'm currently situated. I'm also a consultant with the WHO Regional Office in North Macedonia, and I'm a medical education consultant from Lecturio, and I will be your host or your facilitator for today's session, and I'm very, very happy to be here. Now, we have Lecturio all around the world. We have people who use Lecturio, institutions who use Lecturio, and you hear about this from different sources. So we would love to ask where you're joining us from today. Would also like to know, what is your role? What position do you hold in your organization? And is this your first online event hosted by Lecturio or not? And this is important to us because first, it's important for me to know who am I talking to, and it's also important to try to adjust the session as best as I can based on your roles and your interests. I see the majority of people today are from North Macedonia, so I think my good morning was very appropriate. But I see there's people from the rest of the world, and it's always a pleasure to see people from different continents joining us today. Um, Okay, so thank you for participating in this introductory poll. I see there's people still rolling in. Um, so thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you today, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. If you're newcomers, if this is your first session, you will see that first we start by introducing Lecturio. Who are we? Who's this organization organizing these global demos? But then we'll continue with microlearning. So today we will spend a little bit of time of looking at why microlearning matters. So why is it we're talking about microlearning, and why in this particular period of human history, the science behind microlearning, where does this come from? Do we have proof or evidence that this is working for our learners, for our educators, for our institutions? I will try to give you a few practical applications for educators and how you can embed microlearning if you're in your institution, if you are not already. And then we will talk about how Lecturio leverages microlearning, and if you're Lecturio users, which I hope you are, how you can leverage microlearning throughout the platform in the usage in your institution. We will talk a little bit about AI, and if this is not your first global demo, and if you have met me in the past, you know that I love talking about AI, so all things AI are always welcome. So this will take a little less than an hour, so I suggest we start. So if you're new here, you wouldn't know that Lecturio is the world's leading, most comprehensive digital medical education learning platform that spans the entire medical and nursing curricula. We have content, so it is predominantly video-based, that is attached to concept pages, and we have content from top professors from one of the best medical and nursing schools in the world. So as I mentioned, it covers the entire medical and nursing curricula in all key learning formats. So we have over 12,000 high-end videos, and all these videos are based on learning science. That means that they take into account attention span, something we will discuss more at length throughout today's session, so that your learners can be kept engaged and your learners can use these videos to understand the very complex concepts they need to learn during medical and nursing school. We have over 9,800 clinical cases with text and video explanations so that your learners can also learn the pragmatic side of medical school and nursing school before they get to the bedside. We have over 35,000 recall questions and multiple choice questions predominantly, so your learners can prepare for some of the standardized tests, but also for your general assessment. And we have concept pages that are always attached to these high-end videos. You'll notice there's more concept pages than videos, and that's because one video can have multiple concepts in multiple concept pages. So these videos are all concise on all key concepts. So what I'm talking about here will be very, very important when we're talking about microlearning earlier. Don't worry, you're not going to be quizzed on it. However, it is good to contextualize this and use it for later. So there's 3 to 9 minutes of length with these videos, with the predominant medium length of the videos being around 5 minutes, and there's linked recall questions for formative assessment and learning objectives for all of the videos. In the anatomy section, there's always 3D or also 3D models with 400 pre-mapped views for your students to be able to visualize these concepts and not just imagine them. There's also comprehensive coverage of clinical skills that are important for both doctors and nurses, and your students can see how this is done and learn the steps of doing a clinical skill before they try the clinical skill in your clinics. I already mentioned the clinical cases, and oops, I'm very sorry about that. To practice application of the previously learned concepts, there's detailed learning paths that we can always pre-program for you and your learners if that is needed. I already mentioned the concept pages, one of my favorite parts of the platform. So the 2 sides of precision health science teaching are embedded within Lecturio. So for students, there's personalized smart tutor and there's AI tutor within this, so that students can learn in a way that's safe, that's non-threatening. And for faculty, there's digital teaching assistant that contains a multitude of dashboards where you can follow your students. You can see if any of them are at risk, but you can also kind of just follow what your students are doing. Are they falling behind? Are they not falling behind? Are they better in a certain area or a different area, which allows for you to deploy evidence-informed teaching practices. And this is what that live faculty dashboard that I just mentioned looks like. The assessment staff also help focus teaching time on students, or where students struggle the most, including the most typical mistakes that are being done. And then obviously you can see the aggregated data for your students, for your groups, or for your entire cohort. Now, Lecturio can very much be integrated with your existing setup. So one of the questions we typically get when we talk about Lecturio is, what about our existing setup though? So if you have any LMS or testing like Canvas or Proctorio, or if you have any data analytics softwares that you're using, this can be very well embedded within Lecturio, and you don't have to choose between one or the other, and you can always embed this into your live teaching and training, and microlearning is just one tool in that entire armory of tools that can be used. So today's session, the microlearning for student success, kind of starts now. So the official part, and something that I don't necessarily speak about at every webinar, starts from this moment onwards. So we have a question for you, not questions, I apologize for the typo, is how do you define microlearning? So as you can see, this is an open-ended question. So I am inviting you to go in the chat and kind of give us your own definition of it. As an educator, I am not dogmatic, so I don't necessarily love dogmas, which means there's not going to be one definition that is all encompassing on microlearning. However, I would love to see in the chat how you define it and how you're using it. I'm already seeing that we have learning in small bursts, learning in small chunks, and very short bursts of material covering a narrow topic. So all of these are correct. So we have contextualizing smaller concepts in relation to the larger picture. Focus learning, shorter pieces of learning. So we are kind of going around the same concept here, which I'm very, very glad to see that people are already using. manageable content is also a very good one. So I will give you a definition that I'm using that either contains everything or is close, so it's adjacent to what you've already um, offered to the group. What we really need to always remember with microlearning, and here is the definition that we will dive in a second, is that microlearning is not learning in small, or it's not shortened version of everything that we're learning, but it's learning smart, right? So it's a specific approach that ourselves as educators can use with our students or other educators to learn the same content, the same concept, and the same material, just in a different way, right? In a smarter and faster way. So it is focused. I really love that word. So it's short focused learning units. And typically for microlearning, they go between 3 to 10 minutes, right? So all of these learning topics and objectives are designed around a single objective for students or learners to learn. And it's delivered in formats that optimize attention, retention, and flexibility. I think the most important part of this definition is the flexibility word, because microlearning can be done at any place at any time as needed. And these are bite-sized instructional units that come and go quickly, and they target one specific learning outcome at a time. And if you've used Lecturio and if you've used our videos, you will see that one learning outcome at a time comes embedded with every video, because each of these videos have learning outcomes that are specific to the video written there. And there's evidence from the scholarship, from the literature on health professions education in particular, that shows that microlearning improves engagement. So students tend to be more engaged with the material they're learning. Student satisfaction is higher because they can do this anywhere at any time, and their knowledge retention is higher. I would like to spend a couple of seconds talking about knowledge retention, because in today's age, in today's world, we have the landscape of higher education, or the landscape in education in general, quickly changing, right? So knowledge retention does not mean the same thing it meant 50 years ago or 100 years ago, because there was a time where the core aspect of education was memorization, right? So rote memorization was the only way to go, because people didn't have the entirety of human knowledge in a little block of metal in their back pocket. Today, knowledge retention is mostly about students being able to grasp concepts and then use those concepts as they go. So right now, it's not about remembering as much as it's about understanding and critical thought. So the relationship that our students and our learners and even ourselves have with all of the knowledge surrounding everything, but also surrounding health professionals education, is very, very different now. So this is one of the many reasons why microlearning is becoming increasingly more important. So give me a second. There you go. So why is microlearning important today? And there's many reasons why this is very important, but there's 3 core ones. So first, it's about managing information overload, right? So in today's age, there is information overload because we don't live in a time and age where everything can be really contained in a single book. And I think for the matter materials that were being taught 50, 60 years ago, that could have been the case. Everything that somebody learning general medicine or general nursing needed to know could have been contained in one book that you can just give your students, and they can read that book and understand it, and that was enough. So today there is a lot of information. So our students can find themselves in information overload, and therefore with microlearning, they can do short focused units, which help them cope with the rapid growth of medical knowledge in limited attention spans. And even though this is important for learners, this is even especially and more significantly important for educators who not always have the ability to purpose all of the information that's coming to them and repurpose it for students. So that's why repurposing it for something shorter, like microlearning modules, seems more realistic and more digestible. Then it's about boosting retention and performance. So as I said, this isn't about just sheer memorization, but now it's more about retention of the concepts, right? So microlearning leverages cognitive load theory that we will talk about later, the spacing effect and retrieval practice, to basically improve long-term memory and exam readiness. And the literature and the scholarship that you can't see because my font apparently changed, so I apologize for that, gives us evidence for this exam readiness, for long-term memory, but also for the long-term performance of individuals subjected to microlearning versus those who haven't. And in the end, from the core principles or the reasons, microlearning enables flexible and equitable learning. So apart from this being flexible, meaning students can engage with learning wherever they are, whether they're traveling on a bus, traveling for work, or being at home in the middle of the night if they're night owls. This also is equitable because this allows for students from all across the globe to actually engage with shorter materials from individuals that they wouldn't normally be able to. One example was when I was in grad school, we were able, thanks to microlearning and thanks to digitalization, we were able to sit in lectures that were far beyond our institution, but they collaborated with our institution, and this gave us a more equitable access to learn the most cutting edge experts in the area without us having to travel. So when we're talking about accessibility of knowledge, microlearning is definitely helping out in that regard. Also, I'm hoping that the font change is not going to appear anymore. So has attention changed in any ways in the past few decades? Because I don't know if any of you have heard this. You could use the raise hand function if you want to on this. Um, so have you heard that attention span has shortened thanks to social media? Because there's this discourse going online that I continuously tend to see because people think that our attention span has changed because many people are now using TikTok, and because of those 20-second videos, predominantly um, think that this has changed. Apologies, I see questions are incoming, and I promise to get back to the questions at the end, unless the question is specific to what I'm talking about in the moment, but I promise I'll get to those. So I do have a specific question for you that I would like to before we go there, that I would like that will pop up on your screen now. And this is about whether you think there is changes in attention span. So has learners' attention changed in the past few decades? Has social media made our attention span to be shorter? Or it has remained largely the same? And again, this is a question that I'm curious to see your thinking, your reasoning for, because more often than not, this is the discourse that's present. And I think I've heard a lot of professors say it, and they even use it. They say our students cannot focus anymore, right? So their focus goes down. And I see the majority of the people that engage in the question, and thank you all for participating in this, say that yes, attention span is shorter than what it used to be. Some 2% actually think that it remained the same, and 26% say that it depends on context or they're not sure of the answer. So thank you so much. I see that nobody thinks that attention span is longer, which is very, very interesting. So I had to go and check because me myself was not fully aware because my expertise is not in students' attention or anyone's attention for that matter. So this is what the studies, the scholarship on that says. First, we will take two approaches when it comes to attention, and these two types of approach serve different purposes. One is vigilance, which is basically our attention span, how much we can upkeep the sustained attention. And the other one is tenacity, which is our ability to shift attention, or this is the cognitive flexibility. And the vigilance and tenacity are pretty much a constant, or if the vigilance and tenacity of our 100% of attention is 100, if we have 70% vigilance, we're going to have 30% ability for tenacity at that given moment in time, right? So vigilance is the focus, tenacity is the ability to shift that focus. The higher the tenacity, the lower the focus, and vice versa. So biologically speaking, and this is what I asked in the question, which is the attention span, our vigilance or our ability to concentrate has remained largely unchanged in the past 100 years, right? So this is what people kind of discuss when they say, thanks to social media, students are unable to focus anymore. Well, the idea with the vigilance is being largely unchanged means that biologically within our brains, there are no differences or no discrepancies in how much we can focus. So there's no perfect vigilance. No one can be 100% focused on just one task indefinitely. And this is very largely influenced by both fatigue and workload. But what we see now in the literature is that the vigilance is very heavily dependent on motivation. Just when I was preparing this session, there was a person on Twitter who said that they thought, because of social media, they had attention span issues. And again, this is about individuals who don't have ADHD or who don't have ADD. We're talking about individuals that are not on the neuro on the basically neurospicy spectrum, right? Who are not who don't have ADHD. But this person who thought that they didn't have the ability to focus anymore watched the New Heights podcast episode with Taylor Swift, and they said, so I spent 2 hours staring at the screen, being hyper vigilant, being very focused on this. So we are realizing now that the vigilance is also heavily influenced by motivation. So when we say that students we can't keep our attention anymore, that's because we have seen changes in tenacity. So the shifting attention, or the ability for us to shift our attention from one topic to another topic, has actually changed and increased in everyday life. And that's not due to any biological changes in our brains, but it's predominantly because we have a lot of distractors in the environment. So there's phones, there's a lot of apps, there's a lot of content to go through, and people are trying their hand at multitasking more often than not. So learners, because of these environmental factors, in the past few decades became way better at switching our attention. However, that comes at a cost, because then most of them have shallower focus and less deep processing ability. So because of this, there wouldn't be any biological differences in attention. However, there's environmental factors and environmental stimuli that actually manage to decrease our vigilance by increasing our tenacity without any particular changes in the vigilance itself, which means that by stimulating the students properly and by giving them the right motivation, their vigilance can increase by decreasing their tenacity. And what we really see in the scholarship on microlearning in health professions education in specific, this is something that does help with students nowadays. So instead of them being able to sit at lectures the way they used to 50 years ago and spend 8 hours of the day with short breaks and just listening to someone talk, now that is decreased. And this vigilance is different depending on how students engage with the content. So in person, they tend to have attention span that usually goes 15 minutes before tenacity takes over, around 15 minutes, but online that's 6 to 8 minutes. So it's even shorter if you have them watch videos that are not live, that are not happening at the moment. So knowing that, knowing what we know, knowing what the literature is saying, how do we design learning that can fit with the way that our brain processes and retains information? And to understand that, to be able to answer that, we need to look at key learning science theories, right? So these theories are there to explain, and some of them are pretty out there because they've been around for the past almost 40 years now, 30 something years for the cognitive load theory. But it's important to understand these core principles and these theories so that we can understand what microlearning can offer. And if we understand the theoretic basis and the evidence behind it, then we can discuss together how we can implement or embed this in what our students are doing. So this is grounded in decades of cognitive psychology and cognitive learning theory, and it's effective because it aligns with how our brain processes, stores, and more importantly, retrieves information. And today's digital platforms make it easy to apply at scale, right? So the three core principles, so the three core theories that we will discuss today are the cognitive load theory, the spacing effect, and the retrieval practice. We'll do a little bit of a flyover the cognitive load theory and retrieval practice. The spacing effect is embedded, but the spacing effect is also a little easier to understand and grasp. The spacing effect basically states that learning spread over time strengthens long-term memory. So even if we talk about concepts, if something is spread over a longer period of time, people tend to carry it with themselves and embed it in the way they act and think, as opposed to doing just short bursts of learning without ever going back to that learning, which also discusses retrieval practice well. Now, we have really wonderful Lecturio webinars on both cognitive load theory and retrieval practice that you can just go on the Lecturio website, lecturio.com, and access them, or you can go on our YouTube channel, and all of these webinars are embedded there. So feel free to go and watch them if you want to know more about the cognitive load theory of the retrieval practice. I do have a couple of slides on it, though, so that I don't just mention it. But we're not going to be doing a deep dive of these two. So this is a theory, as I said, it's almost 40 years old. So it's 1988 when it was initially proposed. And it says essentially something we all kind of know today, which is that working memory has a limited capacity to hold information at one time. And this is very important when it comes to learning science in a field such as medicine, where there is a lot of information to be processed, even more so today. So instructional methods in microlearning or in general should avoid overloading students in order to maximize learning. And this is what I'm trying to embed in my practice as well. And even today, I'm trying to give you just the right amount of information so that you can kind of carry something with yourselves beyond today. So this attempts to dissect these issues of cognitive overload and provide recommendations for instructional methods. So there's different types of cognitive load. And as I said, we're not going to go through all of them, but the intrinsic, germane, and extraneous load are present, especially when we're discussing a certain concept in medicine. So you could use this to explain how students engage with material in anything from pathophysiology to clinical medicine. So the intrinsic load is the heaviness of the load of the subject area that we're really teaching. So the intrinsic load is, for example, when your student is learning about cardiomyopathies, right? There's certain intrinsic load that comes with it. This is not an easy topic to understand. So this intrinsic load is pretty much a constant based on the topic and based on the student's previous experience. But this is something the students will carry with themselves when they engage with the material. The extraneous load is how difficult you make it, or the instructors, for the learner. So if your PowerPoint slides, for example, are too complex, or if you're using just didactic lectures without any practical teaching, or if the material is not engaging in any way, the extraneous load becomes bigger. And the germane load is what the students are trying and what you're trying to do to ease this on the students, to ease the extraneous load, basically. So we want a little more of that. So the types of cognitive load all go together when we're trying to teach or when trying to learn a certain topic. And what we're supposed to try to do is reduce the extraneous burden of the load. And this is really where microlearning is shining, because with microlearning, you're just doing short bursts of material, short bursts of information. And these short bursts, because they are not going to be too complex, will reduce the extraneous load for your students. And this is where you need to focus. And this is why the cognitive load theory is important to understand this concept. The retrieval practice, on another hand, and this is something fully embedded in the Lecturio platform, and we will talk a little bit about that, is just simply merely periodically retrieving knowledge on a certain topics at certain intervals. And these intervals are not random. So when your students engage with knowledge, the right interval for them to retrieve what they've learned and what they've discussed is heavily based on a few things. And one of those things is how much the student knows about this topic beforehand. So most of these things are intrinsic to the student. It's how confident they were when answering certain questions. And it's what is the cognitive load of what you're teaching. So used interchangeably with spaced repetition, the retrieval practice is showing in every aspect of learning science and health professionals education how much more the students understand and how much more the students can retrieve what they've learned by using these interchangeably, so spaced repetition with retrieval practice. And it's essential for optimizing the long-term retention of concepts that students have. So I added this slide because from what I could tell, you're from different parts of the world. And there's some parts of the world where reading is still the key approach to learning and to teaching in medical education and nursing education overall. I come from a part of the world where they were telling us when I was a medical student, but I see they still tell that to our students. If you're not reading, what are you doing? So it's read, 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 right? So reading definitely has a place in health professions education. Without reading, students will not be able to engage with the topic in a way that they can see a lot of information about it and try to understand it more. But just reading and rereading does not have a really good long-term effect. And we say testing effect because that's the only way for us to see how much the students are remembering from this part of the material that they've engaged with. So, even though reading certain bouts are important, like in the concept pages with Lecturio, simply reading and rereading the material is not enough. And that active retrieval or active recall is what really bridges the shore from just engaging with the material to actually having it in their long-term memory. So this retrieval aspect is very important, especially because of Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. So you see the retention rate, the percentage elapses down. So this has a downward trend over a few days. And this is where spaced repetition and retrieval practice can shine, because if the students remember something on the day where you taught that, they're going to not retain, or they're going to forget most of that a huge percentage of the material that you talk to in a matter of days. And this is where that's important. And this is where microlearning can take your students along in engaging with this material multiple times, especially because they can't retrieve or they can't do spaced repetition to the entire material continuously. So this is what really the science is saying of how much of the proportion of answered correct exams on final recall or questions on the final recall based on the study strategies. In the curve that we discussed, the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, is basically in the study one section. And then the majority of what the students learn have gone away. Now, recalling it once or repeating it en masse does help somewhat, but repeating the material spaced is what absolutely is helping students retain most of what they've learned long term and goes into their memory. So what are some opportunities for microlearning that you have in your own practice? So now I would like for you to go in the chat again and to share what methods of microlearning do you deploy with your learners, if you have deployed any, or if you're a learner yourself, has there been any times you were subjected to microlearning and what methods were used for you to do that? And we already mentioned some of these methods, but there's also an ability for you to mention something more. I'm going to leave a little bit of time. And I see that people have been asking questions, and I will go back to those. Okay, I see that we have bulleted topics on PPT. We have short videos, formative OSCE stations, absolutely. Yes, the formative OSCE stations are really, really good to be used for microlearning because they tend to be short. There is a very clear distinction of what the student is learning at a certain station and then learning something completely different and have different outcomes in a different station. The self-check questions, the self-assessment aspect is important. The WhatsApp to send links for videos and journal articles is important, and we're going to mention that a little bit. There's video tab for skills. I would love to know more about that. And as I always mention this during webinars, it is such a shame that we're unable to interact properly. So if this was in person, there'd be so much more discussion. But I feel like this is a good opportunity to take what we learned here and then discuss it more at a conference or something. Oh, sorry. Yes, it says about the questionnaire. There's no questionnaire for this question. It's open-ended, so you're free to just write in the chat what can what it is that you're using. There's a really good question for attention span, and I will try to leave a little bit of room in the end so that we can go through that question because it's really, really good. Yes, of course. Question of the week, image of the week, absolutely very, very important and golden when it comes to smaller bursts of education. Okay, thank you all for engaging. Feel free to use the chat option as we go. Give me a second. This is not moving. So let's see microlearning in action, right? So we really saw, I think, why microlearning is good and why we can use it. So after going through the why, and I think there's another slide where we're going to discuss the why for a second, I wanted you to see it in action. So there's different strategies as we saw from the chat, right? So everybody has deployed something, or most people have deployed something or other. And there's no good way to do this. There's no one size fits all. And I do have the one size fits one ideology that I love because what you're deploying in microlearning is also going to heavily depend on a lot of things. And having cultural context, so where you're teaching or where you're learning, having the generation of learners that you have in front of you is very important. Having what technology do you have at your disposal is important. I saw somebody talking about internet bandwidth. That is also important as well, right? So that is going to inform what you're learning. So there's a few strategies here, and I put them in a mnemonic later so that you can kind of remember them afterwards if you ever need them. But the first one is the burst strategy. So the burst is when you're giving them a lot of information really quickly. And this is to break lectures into 5 to 7 minute focused segments. And again, we will come back to this many times during today's talk, but I already mentioned the short Lecturio videos. So when you do a video that's between 3 and 9 minutes, 5 to 7 being the sweet spot for videos, and for focus segments, students are only focusing on that one aspect that you're getting. And this can be done even without a very sophisticated learning platform. As long as you have an LMS, as long as you have an email at your institution, you can always record or pre-record short lectures with just 1 or 2 short learning objectives and break these lectures into shorter videos. So instead of sending your students a 27-minute video, you can just do several videos when you can reduce the cognitive overload and they can watch these videos one after the other with the ability to stop and pause in between. Something that you could improve, so what they can do in between is quiz them. So 1 to 2 minute polls or retrieval questions beyond this 5 to 7 minute video is also very, very helpful. And these retrieval questions, when embedded in a digital platform, can also mean that you can ask about the level of confidence and then you can embed the recall. So the active recall and this question can come back to them a little beyond this micro learning moment that you have. So this will increase their engagement. Then you could do a case, so you can do short vignettes with one decision point, clinical. And this is really good to build clinical reasoning in small steps. Something that I've been trying to do with my learners is we have a clinical reasoning club. So this is just looking at clinical reasoning, and there's a lot of bedside teaching in the process. So sometimes between patient encounters, because when they see multiple patients in one day, we are trying to build or have built before some short vignettes with just one decision point that will use them a little bit later. So they have time to discuss this short vignette during a break, and then they can that is almost like a sneak peek or a trailer of what clinical decision making they will need to do later. And this has been working wonders, and we've done pre-tests and post-tests, but sadly it is not published to be seen. Then you can nudge them. Somebody already mentioned using WhatsApp or sending emails. So it is good to sometimes have push reminders via LMS if you have it in your school, or just WhatsApp and email, because that doesn't require a lot of sophistication. But this does give us some spacing effect and boosts the long-term memory if you learn something and then you can send your students nudges, whether that could be a quiz or a poll that you're sending, or a case related to what they were learning or what they saw in the clinics, or even something just following a lecture or following a day. And then microlearning in action also has dual use. I saw there was already a question about, I need to go back and see the question properly, but there's a question about continuous professional development, so CPD, and you can apply this for both students and faculty CPD. Something that we've been struggling at our institution was CPD for education in particular. So people have had very scared, not a lot of opportunities to engage into CPD for education, and microlearning is doing wonders, especially when you have a digital dashboard where all of this can then be followed, or you can have some digital certificates. And the WHO is also discussing some microlearning certificates where people can go through CPD with microlearning and just get smaller, almost like points of a certificate, and then they can all gather it together and they get a one large CPD portion that happens at different various bursts. And that means that people will there's a higher chance that they will apply what they've learned because they understood the concept and took it with them. And this obviously supports lifelong learning. So everything discussed here is basically within this mnemonic. And I only put it here because I just kind of wanted this to be more visual. So the Q case is the quick bursts, clinical vignettes, active quiz or poll, space nudges, and everywhere, everyone, where you could use it for student teaching and CPD. So everything that we discussed so far, I just wanted to summarize on this slide before we move on to the next section, which is why embed microlearning in your teaching. So I added this here for two reasons. First, if you have someone that's still a little, not decided whether they can use microlearning or they want to decide, or if you yourselves are not convinced, I think this slide is just to help with that. So it's easy to integrate into what you already do. I think the most important aspect of microlearning is that you don't have to reinvent your entire curriculum, and you can tell your teachers, your lecturers, your instructors that they don't have to change everything that they've already done, but they can just take everything that they have and just space it differently and create it in chunks in a way that it will be very helpful for the learners. It enhances but doesn't replace traditional methods, and it's evidence-based. So we already saw it improves retention, engagement, and accessibility. And the main reason why this slide is here is because I've actually struggled with this at my institution. When I tried to discuss microlearning and when I tried to discuss gamification, there was a significant pushback. And let me tell you, there was a clear delineation from different generations of instructors and lecturers as to which aspects were pushed and they weren't very excited for, or which were not. And that's why later we have a slide about myths for microlearning that actually comes from my own practice. So now, microlearning in health professionals education, from what we saw already, does have benefits from all across the board. So if you're someone who teaches students, if you're working with undergraduates, for example, it increases the retention, exam readiness, and reasoning skills. However, that's not where this stops. For faculty, I already discussed the CPD, but it's important to know that this is very scalable and there's lighter prep from the already existing materials. If you're someone that's in a leadership position, it's important to understand how and when to use this for institutions, but also to know what are the benefits of including and embedding microlearning into your curricula within your university and within your institution, because this is flexible, it is cost effective, and it provides, if it's digital, it provides very easy to follow analytics. Now, when I say flexible and when I say cost effective, it's important to also know that something I already mentioned, you don't need a majorly sophisticated, expensive software to put and place it in the institution. However, having digital approach to microlearning significantly eases its integration, because there's a reason why microlearning wasn't all the rage in the 90s, right? Because people used way less sophisticated models of digital tools. But today's digital tools, by just having WhatsApp and email, don't seem sophisticated by our standards. We probably would look sophisticated to people in the 80s or something. But it's important to know that you don't need any very costly tools within your institution to actually use this. Now, we are slowly kind of moving toward the myths. So these are things that I've heard, and then there's a little bit of references at the end there that kind of help me answer these questions to people who are kind of a little bit on edge when it comes to microlearning. So initially, what I heard from my colleagues was that it seems too superficial for medicine. And again, this really goes back to people thinking that you really need to read in depth continuously so that you can be a good doctor. And you need to follow what's new. You need to have a CPD in place. You need to have that lifelong learning habit in it. However, in reality, if you have a good design which has focused objectives and that has retrieval in it, you can ensure depth of microlearning within your institution. So it's not just about doing this once, kind of letting it go, but it's about making sure that there is spaced repetition in the process without this being the same. So you repeat what you need to bring and carry forward. So the first bout of microlearning of a topic and the second bout cannot completely be the same. Another myth is microlearning doesn't scale, right? So the digital platforms make it scalable, trackable, and adaptable in the institution. What's even more important is to know that with digital platforms, you can just recreate and reuse this as many times as you want. Um, However, it's not just the digital platforms that you can do, because if you do bouts of microlearning, even in your didactic lectures in person with your students, you can then scale that and adapt it as you go based on the learners and depending on the learners. Then a lot of people, I think, are afraid, not just with microlearning, but anything when we discuss about new techniques of education, it's that it will replace traditional teaching, mostly didactic. And I think, again, this part of the world has that in particular. So the reality is that this cannot um, completely replace our traditional teaching, and it cannot replace all of our teaching techniques, because the reality is those are still needed, and especially bedside teaching, especially clinical reasoning teaching, must contain something more than microlearning. You can have a microlearning curriculum from beginning to end at your institution, but this is something that complements the lectures, the seminars, even the bedside teaching that we already mentioned. People would also think that this is only for digital natives. So especially if you're a person that doesn't really love technology very much, the reality is that it works across ages. So it's based on universal cognitive principles. So you can use different platforms with different level of complexity, but you can use it in person. And then something that usually I hear when I present anything new, whenever I talk to faculty members, is that faculty just simply doesn't have the time, because we have to juggle a lot of workload, but we also have to wear different hats in our work. So when we work at any institution that has academic and educational aspect attached to it, the reality is most microlearning repurposes your existing slides, cases, and questions. And I think this is probably one of the strongest cases for microlearning, because people are afraid that they'll have to reinvent the wheel yet again, which in this case, that's not the case. So hearing everything we already hear, and we're kind of coming to the end here, is how do I actually implement this in real life? I think this would be the question that you get after you talk about a concept with anyone. So I would say you could use it in your classroom and you could use it without technology, but to really scale it and to really benefit from this, you need to start using more of the technology that's already existing, right? So all of this was already discussed. I'm going to pay attention to two aspects here, which is the mobile first learning, which gives access anytime, anywhere, including resource limited settings, because this can be approached and this can be accessed just via an app. So we mentioned WhatsApp, but that can be even a more complicated app. But people tend to have apps. So most parts of the world have access to the internet and have phones. And even if your institution doesn't have all the sophisticated tools for that, the reality is your students most likely use an app, right? So as long as your students use an app, the mobile first learning can be very much embedded. And the other one is the AI powered personalization. So if you're using AI, you will be able to scale this as much as you want for an adaptive review, remediation, and learner specific pathways. Now, for you to be able to use this, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's existent within Lecturio for microlearning. So all of these aspects that I'm presenting are in the platform regardless of microlearning. But if you're someone who uses this platform or engages with it often, you will see that you can just repurpose everything that's there and then assign it to your students, assign it to groups, or assign it even to your faculty so they can kind of go through this and use these outbursts of microlearning as they go. So the space retrieval software that's embedded is there to automate periodic quizzes and retrieval of important concepts. And whenever a student watches a video or whenever a student answers a question, the platform itself asks the student for their level of confidence. So we will get in a second. It's a little bit later, but there is the level of confidence that students have when answering a question. And based on that confidence, the space retrieval software will bring this to their attention a little bit later. So they've done the video, they have done the questions, and perhaps in 4 days or 5 days, they're just getting the video, they're just getting the question again. So they don't have to go through the video again, but this is a micro-learning moment because when they get the question, they can see if they still remember it and they can actively recall the concept they already have. Because Lecturio has Healer now, NEJM Healer for clinical reasoning, there is interactive learning modules. So you could have students engage and encourage recall of active knowledge while solving clinical cases or answering clinical questions with Healer, which also is digital and can be accessed with anyone from anywhere with an internet connection. Lecturio does have a mobile learning app, so that distance learning and integration of microlearning, what I already mentioned, is regularly enhanced with flexibility within here. Then there's the time-saving feature of the dashboard that I already mentioned. So you can't really do microlearning spontaneously without any follow-up, right? So the idea of someone doing a short outburst of learning somewhere is for you to be able to follow, or for themselves to be able to follow, for some self-assessed CPD, for example, how well are they doing? How much of this is embedded and where it's embedded. So, using these dashboards that are continuously present gives you a better overview of what is going on. So you could also use the quizzing platforms to design and implement low stakes quizzes for people to do this active retrieval. So apart from everything that's already present in the platform, you can also create your own questions. What I'm going to do though now is ask you a question. So if you've attended one of my webinars or global demos, you will know that I always ask this question. I always go through talking about AI. And now I want to know how many of you have used AI in your teaching. There's going to be a pop-up question, but you can also use the chat and answer this. But I want to know what your relationship with AI is, because today you can't really talk about changing education in any way or form, or adjusting education, or making education better without talking about AI, because this is the reality that we have. And I think AI is looking into changing education more than anything else in the last 100 years. I think people were scared of Google. People were scared of calculators. However, AI is now here completely changing our relationship with content, with education, with how students are doing the assignments that we're giving them. So even assessment, it tends to change very much because of AI. Now, you can answer the question, it's there. So it's whether you haven't tried using in your teaching, AI in your teaching, you've tried and don't like it, you use it regularly, or you're a power user. So if you haven't tried it, I'm encouraging you wholeheartedly to start using it, because your students most definitely use it. If not all of them, most of them definitely engage with AI. So there's two ways to go about AI. One is we can just be scared and afraid of what it offers, or the other one is to decide to actively engage and use it to leverage it. Now, I put it here because AI can be one of the most powerful tools to design and look at microlearning, and one of the most powerful tools in personalizing health professions education. Right? I see that 3% of you don't really like it. That is okay. I think that everything is not for everyone. But when it comes to AI and microlearning, the idea is you can use it to shorten and to sort of divide your curriculum and see which parts you can use for microlearning. But what is even more important, you can scale this for your students to obtain feedback, or for you to feedback your students by using AI. Because assessment as we know it, and we have another webinar on assessment that you can access through our platform. But when we talk about assessment, assessment definitely needs to change, because that active recall today brings less merit, because students can just go on AI and find any information that they really need. So AI is fully embedded into different aspects of Lecturio, right? So when I talked about these questions that you can create for your students, they can be low stakes just to practice the active recall. You can also use AI to create multiple choice questions for you. And this is already in Lecturio. So if you really want to see this, try it yourselves, try it for your institution, or get more information, please do not hesitate to contact us and reach us. At the end of this of the slides, I have our contacts, and you can do that if you're interested. But you can create as many as 200 multiple choice questions within a day with very sound and sane distractors, so that your students can continuously be assessed with new and new questions for an active recall at the end of the microlearning aspect and the microlearning session. So this is just one tool in an armamentarium of tools to enhance learning. And there's a lot of tools that are written here, and you can actually use these tools alongside microlearning. So when it comes to a tool in an armamentarium of tools to enhance learning, microlearning is not necessarily just another tool, but it's something that where a lot of tools converge and can be used for its leverage. So, with 5 minutes to the end, what I want to do is ask if you have any questions. I do see that there's some questions at the in the Q&A section portion, and I'm going to access them now. But please feel free to ask questions. And then you can also ask us if you we're asking if you want a personalized Lecturio demo, and if you do, you can get in touch with us. There is a slide for that as well. You can get your resource pack here, but please do get in touch. Now let's look at the Q&A. Can your resources be used for continuous professional development? Some of our resources can. Please feel free to get in touch with us. On the next slide, it is our learning science email, and we can answer more specific questions based on the country where you're practicing and based on what exactly do you need. But the short answer is yes, they can. And then there's another question. Is your microlearning format accessible with people who have poor internet and bandwidth? I would say yes and no, right? So it really depends. When it comes to Lecturio, people do need to have a certain connection to the internet, but the good part about Lecturio is that you don't need continuous internet connection. So if you have internet somewhere, you can download a lot of the aspects from the platform that then you can use with your students. So as long as the bandwidth of the internet allows email, you can download anything and then send it via email to your learners. And there's many ways for you to engage with the students using Lecturio without having any fancy internet bandwidth. Thank you all for answering the poll question, and let me see if there's any questions in the chat. I see that people say most institutions don't allow it when it comes to AI. That is true, but I would say students are finding a workaround. They're finding a way around it. I think as lecturers, you might not have that full access, but sometimes I use it for my own continuous professional development. I learn something from AI. So there's lots there. Let me see. I see still wonderful ideas in the chat. Thank you all for sharing this. I'm sure this is very useful for people that are in this webinar. There was one question who says, why do we not try to improve students' attention span? Is reduced attention span a desirable thing while understanding and agreeing with the second core reason for microlearning? So I would say we absolutely need to try to improve students' attention span. I just think that in an environment where the distractors are too great, because this environment tends to go everywhere now, because we all have our phones with us constantly. I think it's important for us to try to adapt to the attention span that the majority of our learners would have. So while I fully agree with you that improving attention span is desired and important, I still think that we need to try to look at the attention span and the flexibility of people that we're teaching, of our learners. Now, to improve attention span from what we're finding in the literature, finding the right motivation for people to keep their attention span, to keep their vigilance is also important. So I think that here it's very important to learn which generation are we teaching. So I think when we're teaching Gen Z versus millennials versus someone who's Gen X or a baby boomer, it's heavily dependent what generation people are so that we can have the right approach, because the motivation can be very different in all of these groups and the age can be very different in all of these groups. So we absolutely need to improve the attention span while still trying to adjust for contexts where the attention span is not is not sorry, I'm reading the other questions, is not possible. So people are asking if this can help for USMLE Part 1. Yeah, absolutely. So the platform does have learning paths for USMLE Part 1 to embedded in the platform, but microlearning absolutely helps because especially USMLE Part 1 predominantly goes into learning concepts and understanding concepts. So someone doing spaced repetition and retrieval with microlearning embedded throughout the, let's say, 8 months or 6 months or however long they're preparing for USMLE Part 1, this can be absolutely helpful. Then I see a comment that every student have different learning capacity. Absolutely. That's why I think the age of personalized health professions education is very important. And I think this is where AI can be leveraged, because we can't always necessarily know this capacity for each of our students and learners, but having AI, having moments of microlearning, but also following, the dashboard on the Lecturio platform can kind of make you get a sense and a glimpse of what your students' learning capacity is and what the approach to them needs to be. So I think there's one more question, and then we can call it a day or an evening for someone. I fully agree with what's written there. Adequate sleep, I think, helps with attention and memory. Um, Oh, does Lecturio have sessions for it? Well, we do have a lot embedded within our platform. So if anyone wants to get the platform for their institution, they can leverage this and use it for USMLE Step 1. However, if you have more more in-depth questions about USMLE Step 1, please do get in contact with us and we will answer all your specific questions. I think this is the poll that you already had, and I can my email would be just my name, last name at lecturio.com. So please do feel free to get in touch. We're already at the hour. I want to thank each and every single one of you for being here with us, for sticking to the end, and for showing interest. I'm looking forward to meeting you around and get in touch with you. I'm writing my email one more time so that people can get in touch if needed with more question, and you can, there it is, and then you can access all of these webinars and everything we have on our website. Have a wonderful day, evening, or morning, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you. Goodbye.